So in my larger project, I turned to concrete examples of how Native treaty camps, including Standing Rock, and Palestinian resistance, especially in Hebron and the southern Hebron Hills, exposed settler logisticality from the point of view of ongoing circulations of Native and Palestinian complex relationality. And I only have time to talk a little bit, very tentatively and very humbly, about Standing Rock. But first I want to just say a word about the boycotts associated with anti-colonial actions, these anti-colonial actions, because from the point of view of settler logisticality, you can really see why boycotts freak people out. Boycotts freak people out because they turn the geo-economic processes of logistical systems into vulnerabilities, showing them to be subject to decomposition, blockages at transfer points, and disruption. And they tend to a kind of co-resistance that strengthens alternative circulations of relationality. As Israeli scholar Eyal Weizman says, boycotts are like general strikes. You have to build relationships at the same time that you withdraw from other relationships. At its best, boycotts represent a collective affirmation that global capitalism remains rooted in social relationships, so it's neither abstracting nor self-regulating. At its very best, it can prefigure a globalizing of anti-oppression struggles waiting in the wings of history. The actions of Energy Transfer Partners, the state of North Dakota, the Army Corps of Engineers, the private security company Tiger Swan, and the Obama and Trump administrations at Standing Rock demonstrate that the US state and settler capitalism remain in logistical war with Native nations in the sense of trying to increase their own operational capacities while seeking to uproot or disable relations that sustain indigenous ones. In Fighting for Our Lives, #NoDAPL in historical context, Lower Brule Sioux scholar Nick Estes lets us see the occupation of Standing Rock treaty lands by ETP as part of the Indian Wars that have never ended, which the Lakota have fought always defensively to protect people, water, and land from, to quote Estes, spoliation in the name of profit, and which have been fought logistically by generations of what Estes calls fat takers. Colonial pre-state actors, established settler colonial state actors, and now unevenly privatized neoliberal settler state actors and kinds of colonial capitalisms. Estes makes visible long histories of logistical war as trespass, the trespass of settlers, the trespass of dams, the trespass of pipelines, as invasion, with the Army Corps of Engineers playing a long and continuing role in this story, and as the forceful takeover of land through violence, corridors of occupation, fractionation, violated treaties, and the coercions of extractive industries. With ETP and DAPL, we see the latest circulation of settler accumulation being built on top of previous circulations, which for me is actually symbolized in the really hideous badge of the South Dakota State Highway Patrol, the badge that they wear. It's supposedly honoring, it's a settler history-produced legend that features a profile of Red Tomahawk, and the Highway Patrol is supposedly honoring him as a member of the BIA police force who shot and killed Sitting Bull. But this obscene badge, to me, reveals important continuities between genocidal violence of war for settlement, the coloniality of the policing of highways and the controlling of indigenous bodies through policing, and now the bundling of this colonial state highway patrol into this other thing, this fusion of extra-state militarized security forces acting on behalf of a global power. So to work against the singularity that colonial rationalities, including the ones inside of me, slot everything indigenous into in order to then sort it into good or bad forms, or complicit or resistant forms, I want to emphasize that Standing Rock is part of a whole context, right? It's not a singular thing synchronically or dichronically. Since contact, there's never not been a time when Native people were not working for survival and resurgence, and the more than 200 treaty camps blocking the desecrated intentions of extractive industries today connect to the treaty camps of the 1980s and 90s up in my neck of the woods, Anishinaabe spearfishing stands in the Midwest, and they connect much farther back and much more radically forward. I like the term treaty camp, not only because it vouchsafes the belonging with treaty lands, but it also brings up these older kind of places, right? The older notion of trading camps, winter camps, gatherings for diplomacy, from the mouth of the Cannonball River being known to tribal members as a powerful place of wakan, of gathering, praying, and honoring, down the generations to how the hundreds of native nations who came together at Standing Rock in 2016 were actually renewing relations that in that very spot in 1974 had led to the founding of the International Indigenous Treaty Council. Tiger Swan at Standing Rock created a new assemblage of privatized violence that tried to organize all colonizer jurisdictions, highway police, state police, BIA, FBI, National Guard, all of them, under its authority on the basis of its superior logistical powers, its helicopters, manpower, military equipment, and infiltration. I have a few shots from their, I think you guys can see it well enough, right? From their website, right? Their motto is solutions to uncertainty. And as we see, their business plan involves framing mobility itself, the mobility that defines logistics and globalization as risks, seeing security challenges everywhere all the time, right? They promote themselves as a kind of powerful, all-powerful guardian angel for enterprise, for government, for families of the 1%, and for private. I think it means private individuals or whenever you need something to be private, right? So they're kind of selling themselves as a kind of privatized projection of US imperial power. US imperial power privatized, right? A supersession of Roosevelt's Rough Riders into a global protection force for hire. The investigative news site, The Intercept, acquired an amazing amount of insider information about Tiger Swan and published a series of troubling and illuminating articles. This is a daily intelligence update. I think they were able to get like hundreds of these, and they've published them all. They're worth checking out. Blurring legal and extra-legal violence, Tiger Swan was able to leverage law enforcement on behalf of ETP and to exercise all sorts of extra-legal policing and counterintelligence operations because after 9/11, critical infrastructure, something like, I have it written down, 85% of which is owned by private people, has been called a national security issue, right? Trump just tried to say that steel tariffs were a national security issue, which connects to this whole thing. Tiger Swan was able to embed itself into South Dakota's Fusion Center and at least 4 other fusion centers, which are these centers that were started after 9/11 so that anti-terrorism intelligence could be shared among state, local, and federal law agencies. But Tiger Swan, this private company, actually took a coordinating role, not only in North Dakota, but in many, many other states where there seemed to be protests or problems with the pipeline. One Tiger Swan internal situation report from 10/3/16 shows that Tiger Swan met with campus police at the University of Illinois Springfield to see what they knew about protests and to see if they would be amenable to setting up one of these fusion centers and sharing information with this private security company. They thought part of their job indeed was to pressure law enforcement to be more suppressive to demonstrators. In one situation report, they applauded the fact that in Lee County, Iowa, bail was raised for demonstrators, and in the same report, they complained about a too lax attitude of law enforcement elsewhere. Quote, Calhoun, Boone, and Webster County law enforcement are not supportive of DAPL's security mission. We need to work closer with them to ensure future protesters will be fined, if not arrested. So from the very beginning, their approach was completely militarized. We learn from their shared daily intelligence reports that Tiger Swan helicopters provided live feed that was watched in real time by observers from the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the BIA, state and local police, and is now being used by state prosecutors as evidence in trials against water protectors. And this was, again, the intention from the very beginning, right? In their reports, they talk about that their responsibilities include collecting information of an evidentiary level that would ultimately aid in prosecution of protesters. Indeed, they determined surveillance and counterintelligence to be a big part of their job, and intelligence, as we see, was a category on their daily situation report. Reading between the lines, it's clear to see they have people on the ground, posing as protectors, trying to exploit divisions within the camps, which are described as dangerous, full of weapons, and organized like militant encampments. And you see they have a part that says, like, what we do not know, number and type of weapons in camp, who is providing military training, when and where the next event will occur, and how many rioters will attend. Have not confirmed command and control at events. Suspect Cody Hall, right? Okay, and you see they're trying to exploit, there's the third line down. It says there are divisions within the camps, i.e. natives versus whites, and intertribal conflicts. There are outsiders deliberately moving the rioters towards violent action, et cetera, right? They really did all the time refer to water protectors as terrorists, camps as battlefields. And in one internal report, they use the find, fix, and finish language that the special ops uses to talk about terrorist targets in a promise to ETP that they would find enough intelligence that ETP could find, fix, and eliminate public pipeline threats. One report from 9/22 targeted Palestinians in the camp, especially Palestinian-American activist Haitham El-Zabri, and it stated, quote, "The presence of additional Palestinians in the camp and the movement's involvement with Islamic individuals is a dynamic that requires further investigation." Today, Tiger Swan is aiding extractive industries and state-level Republicans in lawfare, including the creation of legislation which seeks to create new legal subjects, criminalizing resistors as critical infrastructure terrorists, right, which is a formation like Black identity terrorist, right? New crimes in the forms of anti-direct action obstruction bills, like obstructing a roadway, like protesting closing down a roadway, a felony crime, obstructing business, economic terrorism, and the work of journalism and obstruction of government functions. So even as settler projects pile on top of one another, and today's settler logisticality transits yesterday's fatal interlude, eliminatory settler colonialism remains a failure. We see over and over again what Mushwana Goman calls the inability to bind land to settler societies. We get a sense of the ongoing continuity of Lakota circulations from the testimony one architect gave, from the Standing Rock Nation gave in the form of a story of his own life. Quote, "We would stop and our grandmother, who was born in 1881, would have us go up to the nearby hills to the west, not far from the old wagon trail, and take food to the spirits of our relatives. Since childhood, I have been aware of the many buried in this area, stretching north and northwest of one of DAPL's proposed access roads." Arguably, the prayers and ceremonies of treaty camp actions can be seen as related to this ongoing consideration for ancestors. At Standing Rock, other treaty camps, like in the West Bank, co-resistance importantly takes the shape of guest-host relations, inviting, welcoming, thanking, gifting, explaining, asking permission, telling stories that transmit land-based knowledges under conditions where, to use the Palestinian expression, existence is resistance, and to use the expression from Leanne Simpson, where our presence is our weapon. Setting up normal circulations of life, kitchens, building roads, putting up tents, making up meeting places, bespeaks pre-existing circulations that know and treat land and collective existence otherwise. To quote Nick Estes, "The prolonged peaceful encampment practices an unsettling counter-sovereignty." Mushwana Goman writes, "Native people's stories of land, whether violent or from time immemorial, move us beyond the abstract state rendering of space as territory or property.